If you've never smelled the desperate mixture of stale floor wax, spiked punch, and 20-year-old regret, then you've never been to a high school reunion. It's a specific scent. It smells like desperation. It smells like people trying to rewrite history before the appetizers run out. I was standing in the back of the Lincoln High gymnasium, leaning against the padded wall where I used to get shoved during dodgeball. The lights were too bright. The streamers were sagging, and the sound system was screeching. Screech. The feedback from a microphone cut through the room like a dentist drill. Every conversation stopped. 200 heads turned toward the stage. And there he was, Brad the Tank Miller. 20 years ago, he was the varsity quarterback who shoved kids like me into lockers. Today, he was the reunion committee president, standing center stage in a gray suit that was too tight in the shoulders and too shiny under the fluorescent lights. A polyblend armor of mediocrity. He tapped the microphone. Thump. Thump. Is this thing on? Can you guys hear me in the back? Even the burnouts. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. Brad grinned. He loved it. He was holding a plastic cup of lukewarm beer in one hand and the microphone in the other, swaying slightly. He wasn't drunk on the alcohol. He was drunk on the attention. Welcome back, class of '04, he bellowed. Look at us. We made it. Some of us, anyway. His eyes scanned the room. He was hunting. He needed a target. That's how bullies work. They need a contrast to make themselves shine brighter. His eyes landed on me. I saw the recognition flicker in his gaze. Then the malicious delight. Well, Brad said, his voice booming over the PA system. He pointed a thick finger directly at me. If it isn't Dante, I didn't think you'd show up, man. I thought you were allergic to sunlight. The spotlight of the room shifted. Everyone turned. I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. The popular girls, now real estate agents. The jocks, now coaches or construction foremen. They all looked at the guy in the back corner. I was wearing a plain black t-shirt, dark denim, and boots. No watch, no tie. To them, I looked like I was still stocking shelves at the local grocery store. Still wearing the same clothes from 1999. Hut Dante. Brad laughed, and the sycophants in the front row laughed with him. I guess the tech boom missed some of us. Hey, if you need a drink ticket, come see me. I'm feeling generous. The first round is on the guy who actually made something of himself. He toasted the air. The room chuckled. It was an awkward, pitying sound. They looked at me and saw a failure. They saw a guy who hadn't grown up. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I didn't blush. I just stared at him. I let his laughter hang in the air. I let him enjoy his little moment of dominance. Because he didn't know what was inside the breast pocket of my denim jacket. He didn't know that folded inside was a notarized contract I had signed 20 minutes ago in the principal's office. A contract that gave me the legal authority to shut this entire circus down. Brad thought he was the lion in the arena. He didn't realize he was just a clown, and I had just bought the circus. To understand why I was standing in that gym, taking abuse from a guy who peaked during the Bush administration, you have to understand the players. My name is Dante. In high school, I was a ghost. I sat in the back. I didn't speak. I absorbed information. While Brad was throwing touchdown passes and hazing freshmen, I was learning code. While he was winning homecoming king, I was building algorithms. Today, I own a logistics software firm that specializes in supply chain healing. When a global shipping route breaks, my code fixes it. 3 months ago, a conglomerate based in Zurich acquired my company for a number that has 2 commas and 8 zeros. I'm what you call a liquidly wealthy. I don't carry cash. I don't wear brands. I don't need to. My signature alone can move markets. But nobody in this gym knew that. To them, success looks like a leased BMW and a manager title. Which brings us to Brad. Brad Miller is the regional manager for a mid-tier rental car company. I looked him up before I came. It's a habit. I never walk into a room without knowing the leverage points. Brad makes a decent salary, lives in a McMansion he's leveraged to the hilt, and spends his weekends reliving his glory days at the local dive bar. He is the type of man who thinks being loud is the same thing as being right. He thinks power is something you take from others by making them feel small. I hadn't planned on coming to the reunion. I had the invite in the trash. But then I got the email from Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable was the principal when I was a student. She was the only one who stopped the bullying. She gave me the key to the computer lab so I could eat lunch in peace away from Brad and his crew. She saved me. Her email was short. Dante, I know you probably want to forget this place. I don't blame you, but the district is cutting our budget. They're going to condemn the gym and shut down the after-school programs. I'm trying to rally the alumni for donations. If you could come, even just to show a friendly face, it would mean the world to me. That was the hook. I didn't come for the nostalgia. I came for the rescue mission. I arrived an hour early. I parked my car, a matte gray Audi RS7, 3 blocks away. I didn't want a car to do the talking. I wanted to see people's true faces. I walked into the administration building and met with Mrs. Gable. She looked older, tired. The fight had drained her. We need $50,000 to keep the gym open for another year, she had told me, wringing her hands. Brad Miller says he's going to make a big splash tonight and try to get everyone to chip in. But people are struggling. Dante, I don't think we'll make it. Don't worry about Brad. I had told her, pulling a fountain pen from my pocket. I have a different idea. We drafted the paperwork right there. A full endowment. A complete renovation. A legacy. But there was a catch. I added a clause. A specific, petty, beautiful clause. Are you sure about this part? Mrs. Gable had asked, reading the fine print, a small smile playing on her lips. Absolutely, I said. It's the only condition. So I signed it. I folded the copy into my pocket, and I walked into the gym to face the music. Brad was already working the room when I entered. He was shaking hands aggressively, gripping people's shoulders a little too hard. He was wearing a gold watch that I spotted immediately as a fake. The sweep of the second hand was too ticked, too jerky. A real Rolex sweeps. A fake one stutters. Just like Brad. He was currently cornering Tim, a guy who used to be in the band. Tim looked uncomfortable. You gotta leverage your assets, Tim. Brad was shouting over the music. I manage a fleet of 500 vehicles. 500. That's leadership. What are you doing? Still teaching piano. I leaned against the back wall, watching him operate. He was a vampire, feeding on the insecurities of everyone around him. He needed everyone to know he was the alpha. He didn't know that the alpha isn't the dog barking at the gate. The alpha is the owner of the house who decides whether the dog gets fed. And tonight, Brad was going to starve. The confrontation was inevitable. Physics dictates that a vacuum must be filled, and Brad's ego was a black hole sucking the oxygen out of the room. He was eventually going to pull me into his orbit. I was standing by the punch bowl, a nostalgic mix of red dye, number 40, and cheap ginger ale, when a shadow fell over me. So a voice boomed. Dante, you're really just hanging out, huh? I turned. Brad was standing there, flanked by 2 of his old offensive linemen, Greg and Mike. They looked like oversized children holding beer bottles by the neck, grinning because Brad was grinning. Just hydrating, Brad, I said calmly. Brad stepped closer. He invaded my personal space, a classic intimidation tactic. He smelled of musk and desperation. He raised his wrist, making a show of checking the time on that gold-plated anchor he called a watch. Nice watch, I said, deciding to feed the beast. Rolex. Submariner, Brad lied without blinking. Got it as a bonus last quarter. My region crushed the numbers. We moved more mid-sized sedans than the entire tri-state area. He let that hang there, as if renting out Kia Optimas was akin to landing a rover on Mars. That's impressive, I said. Business is good. Business is booming, buddy. He poked me in the chest with a stiff finger. That's what happens when you're a leader. You wouldn't know about that, though. What are you doing these days? Still playing video games in your mom's basement. I work in software, I said. Technically true. Brad laughed, looking back at his goons. Software, right? You know, my company is looking for detail guys. You know, to wash the cars when they come back dirty. It's honest work, Dante. Minimum wage, but hey, you get to drive the cars around the lot. If you need a referral, let me know. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a flimsy Vistaprint business card. He tucked into the pocket of my t-shirt. Call me, he smirked. I'll see if I can pull some strings. Before I could respond, the feedback squealed again. Brad's eyes lit up. It was showtime. All right, boys, duty calls, he said, adjusting his tie. Watch and learn. He strode to the stage, grabbing the microphone like he was about to headline a rock concert. "Music! Cut the music," he yelled. The DJ, a confused sophomore, killed the track. "Listen up, everyone," Brad commanded. "We all know why we're here. Sure, it's great to see old faces. But we also know Lincoln High is hurting. The gym roof is leaking. The jerseys are 10 years old. The district is trying to shut us down." He paused for dramatic effect. He looked sad. It was a terrible performance. "But not on my watch," he declared. "I didn't become a regional manager by letting things fail. I believe in giving back. I believe in legacy." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a giant, oversized check. The kind made of cardboard. It was already printed. He had brought this from home. "That is why," Brad shouted, "I am personally donating $1,000. He flipped the check around. The crowd gasped. To be fair, for many people in that room, $1,000 was real money. There was polite applause. Then, prompted by Brad's goons, the applause grew louder. Brad soaked it in. He held the check up like a trophy. Thank you, he yelled. "But $1,000 isn't enough. We need community. We need everyone to step up." He started scanning the crowd again. He was looking for blood. "Come on, people. Who's going to match me? Greg? Mike? I know you guys are good for 50. He worked the room, shaming people into pledging $20, $50. He was squeezing them dry. It was uncomfortable to watch. Then, he found me again. "What about you, Dante?" he called out over the speakers. "I know you're in software, but surely you can spare 20? Or do you need to ask your mom for an advance on your allowance?" The room went silent. The cruelty was sharp. He wasn't just asking for money. He was trying to establish a hierarchy. He was the king, and I was the peasant. "Come on, Dante," he goaded. "Don't be a cheapskate. Empty those pockets. Let's see what you got." There is a moment in every negotiation where the amateur overplays his hand. He mistakes silence for submission. He mistakes patience for fear. I stood there, feeling the heat of the spotlight. My heart wasn't racing. My palms weren't sweating. In fact, my pulse had probably slowed down. I looked at Brad on that stage. I looked at the sweat glistening on his forehead. I looked at the cheap fabric of his suit straining against his gut. I looked at the fake watch that was ticking, tick, 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 counting down the seconds of his social dominance. I felt a profound sense of calm. I could have ended it right there. I could have shouted back. I could have told him that the allowance he was mocking could buy his entire rental fleet twice over. But that would have been messy. That would have been a debate. And I don't debate with people who rent BMWs to impress high school classmates. I looked over at the side of the stage. Mrs. Gable, the principal, was standing there. She looked terrified. She was clutching a folder to her chest, her knuckles white. She caught my eye. She looked like she was about to be sick. I gave her a microscopic nod. "Not yet," the nod said. "Let him finish." I needed this silent gathering. I needed Brad to climb as high as possible. I needed him to stake his entire reputation on this moment. I needed him to be the savior of Lincoln High, because the higher he climbed, the longer the fall would be. "Nothing," Brad scoffed into the mic, interpreting my silence as poverty. "Cat got your tongue? Or just your wallet?" He shook his head, looking at the crowd with mock pity. "It's okay, folks. Not everyone can be a winner. Some people are just background characters. And that's fine. We need people to wash the cars, right?" The crowd laughed nervously. They were uncomfortable, but they went along with it because Brad was the one holding the check. He was the one with the power. "All right," Brad said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Let's get a photo. Mrs. Gable, get up here. Come accept this check." He waved the principal onto the stage. She walked up the stairs slowly. She looked small next to him. Brad threw his arm around her shoulder, pulling her in tight for the photo op. He beamed. He flashed a thumbs up. "Smile, Mrs. Gable," he said loud enough for the mic to catch. "I just saved your gym." He was glowing. He had one. He was the hero, the rich, successful alumni, the big man on campus. I reached into my denim jacket pocket. I felt the crisp edge of the envelope. The trap was set. The bait was taken. The jaws were about to snap. I took a step forward, moving out of the shadows and into the center aisle. "Actually, Brad," I said. My voice wasn't amplified, but in the sudden quiet of the gym, it carried. "Mrs. Gable isn't accepting that check." Brad blinked. He lowered the mic. He looked at me like I was a cockroach that had learned to speak. "Excuse me," he laughed. "Sit down, Dante. The adults are talking." "She can't accept it," I said, continuing my slow walk toward the stage. My boots thudded softly on the hardwood. "Because the project is already funded." I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I looked up at him. I didn't shout. I didn't posture. I just looked at him with the flat, dead eyes of a shark that has just entered the wading pool. Completely, I added. Brad looked confused. He looked at Mrs. Gable. "What is he talking about? Who funded it?" Mrs. Gable stepped out from under Brad's heavy arm. She straightened her blazer. She took the microphone from his hand. She didn't look terrified anymore. She looked relieved. "He's right, Brad," she said, her voice trembling slightly, then steadying. We have another donor." The pivot was complete. Now, it was time for the execution. The silence that followed Mrs. Gable's announcement was heavy. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Brad blinked, his brain trying to process the information. The wiring in his head, built on 20 years of arrogance, was sparking. Another donor? Brad laughed, but it sounded hollow. He looked around the gym, searching for a local car dealership owner or maybe a successful chiropractor. Who? Did old man Jenkins leave his estate to the wrestling team? What is it? Another $500. We can add it to the pot. He tried to rally the crowd. "Come on, folks. Every little bit helps, right?" Mrs. Gable ignored him. She looked down at the piece of paper in her hand. Her hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from the sheer magnitude of what she was holding. "This morning," Mrs. Gable said into the microphone, her voice gaining strength, "the district received a wire transfer. It wasn't for $500, and it wasn't for $1,000. She looked up, scanning the room, and her eyes landed on me. "The donation is for $5.5 million. The air left the room. You could actually hear the collective gasp. It was a physical reaction. $5.5 million. In a town like this, that wasn't just money. That was God-tier power. That was rename the school money. Brad froze. His cardboard check for $1,000 suddenly looked like a napkin. His arm dropped to his side. $5 million, he stammered. That's impossible. Who has that kind of cash? Who is the donor?" Mrs. Gable took a breath. The donor wished to remain anonymous until the funds cleared. But now that the deed is signed, he has given me permission to release his name. She pointed a trembling finger toward the center aisle, toward the guy in the black t-shirt and boots. "Thank you, Dante." The room didn't just turn, it snapped. Necks craned, eyes widened. The people who had been laughing in my old clothes 5 minutes ago were now looking at those same clothes with X-ray vision, realizing that the lack of logos wasn't poverty. It was the ultimate luxury. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just kept walking toward the stage. The crowd parted. They physically jumped out of the way. It was like I was radioactive. I walked up the wooden stairs, the sound of my boots heavy and deliberate. I reached the podium. Brad was still standing there, his mouth slightly open, his face pale and sweating. He looked at me, then down at my boots, then back at my face. He was trying to reconcile the loser in his head with the multimillionaire standing in front of him. The cognitive dissonance was breaking him. "Dante," he whispered off mic. But you drive a..." "I didn't drive the Audi tonight," I said quietly, just for him. "I walked." I reached out and gently took the microphone from his hand. He let go without a fight. He was paralyzed. I turned to face the crowd. The same crowd that had ignored me for 4 years. The same crowd that had just watched Brad humiliate me. "I didn't do this for the applause," I said. My voice was low, deep, and steady. The feedback squeal was gone. "I did this because when I walked these halls 20 years ago, I didn't feel safe. I had to hide in the computer lab to eat my lunch. I had to wait until the parking lot cleared out before I could walk home." I looked at Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable gave me a sanctuary. Now, I'm giving one back to the next generation. A state-of-the-art facility, new equipment, new roof, and a trust fund to keep the lights on for the next 50 years. The room erupted. People were cheering, clapping. Some were even crying. It was a wave of relief. But I wasn't done. I raised a hand. The room went silent instantly. Money commands attention. "However," I said, "there is a condition. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out the folded legal document. I unfolded it slowly, the crisp paper crinkling near the microphone. When you donate a building, I explained, my tone shifting from benevolent to clinical. You get to set the rules. You get to decide the culture of the institution. And I have a very specific vision for the culture of the Dante Athletic Complex. I turned my head and looked directly at Brad. He was standing a few feet away, looking like a deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. Brad, I said, do you remember sophomore year? The locker room incident. Brad swallowed hard. He nodded weakly. Of course he remembered. He had taped me to a bench and left me there for 3 hours. I remember it too, I said. I remember a lot of things. I remember you telling me that I didn't belong here, that I was taking up space, that I should go back to the basement. I looked back at the document. Well, I took your advice. I went to the basement. I built a company. And now I'm back. I cleared my throat and began to read. Per Clause 4, Section B of the Deed of Gift. The facility shall be open to all students, faculty, and alumni of Lincoln High School, regardless of academic or athletic standing. I paused. With one exception, I looked up. The tension in the room was so tight it could have snapped a steel cable. The individual known as Bradley Miller is hereby designated as persona non grata. He is permanently barred from entering the premises, the grounds, or attending any event hosted by the Dante Athletic Complex. Any attempt to enter will be considered criminal trespassing. The silence was absolute. It was violent. Brad's face turned a deep, blotchy purple. What? You can't do that. This is my reunion. I organized this. I'm the president. Not anymore, I said. You're just a trespasser. I nodded toward the back of the room. 2 men stepped out from the shadows near the fire exit. They weren't the high school janitors. They were private security, ex-military, wearing dark suits that cost more than Brad's car. They moved with the silent, fluid grace of predators. They walked down the aisle and up the stairs. Brad panicked. He tried to grab a mic back. This is a joke. You can't be serious. Dante, come on, man. It was high school. We were kids. I pulled the mic away. We aren't kids anymore, Brad. We're adults. And in the adult world, actions have consequences. You wanted to be the big man? You wanted to flex? Well, this is what a real flex looks like. The security guards reached him. One of them, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, placed a hand on Brad's shoulder. It wasn't a suggestion. Mr. Miller, the guard said, his voice like gravel. It's time to go. Get off me, Brad shouted, flailing. He looked at the crowd, pleading. Greg, Mike, help me out here. He looked at his old linemen, his boys. Greg and Mike didn't move. They looked at the security guards. They looked at me. And then they looked at their shoes. They knew where the power lay now. The hierarchy had flipped in 10 seconds flat. No one is coming to help you, Brad, I said softly, because you never helped anyone. The guards gripped him firmly by the arms. They didn't drag him, but they marched him. He was escorted down the stairs, past the stunned faces of his former classmates, past the punch bowl, and toward the exit. You'll hear from my lawyer, Brad screamed as they pushed the double doors open. I know people. I'm a regional manager. The doors slammed shut. The silence returned. I stood alone at the podium. I folded the contract and put it back in my pocket. Now, I said to the room, who wants to talk about the new science wing? The rest of the night was a blur of handshakes and apologies. Suddenly, everyone remembered how smart I was in high school. Suddenly, the girls who wouldn't look at me in the hallway wanted to know if I was single. Suddenly, the guys who ignored me wanted to pitch me their startup ideas. I was polite. I nodded. I smiled. But I didn't engage. I knew exactly who they were. They were the same people they had always been. The only difference was the price tag on my shirt. I spent most of the night talking to Mrs. Gable. She was crying happy tears. We looked over the blueprints for the new gym. We talked about scholarship programs for kids who, like me, didn't fit the mold. You really banned him? She asked quietly as the night wound down. Forever. Forever, I said. Bullies don't change, Mrs. Gable. They just find new victims. If I let him in, he'd just find a way to make someone else feel small. This building isn't for him. It's for the kids he would have tormented. She squeezed my hand. You're a good man, Dante. I'm just a guy with a good memory. I replied. I left around midnight. I didn't take a gift bag. I didn't take any phone numbers. I walked out the back exit into the cool night air. The security guards were waiting by my real car, which I had moved closer. The Audi RS7 sat under the streetlight, a dark gray Predator. Any trouble? I asked the lead guard. None, sir, he replied. Mr. Miller sat on the curb for about 20 minutes making phone calls. Then he got into his BMW and drove off. He was crying, sir. Good, I said. I got into the car. The interior was quiet, insulated from the world. I started the engine. The dash lit up, illuminating the receipt for the wire transfer that was sitting on the passenger seat. $5,500,000. It was a lot of money. But as I drove away from Lincoln High, watching the school fade in the rearview mirror, I knew it was the best money I had ever spent. I had bought my past. I had rewritten the ending. And as for Brad, he learned the hardest lesson of all. You can peak in high school if you want. You could be the king of the prom. But eventually, the real world comes knocking. And out here, the kings aren't the ones who shout the loudest. They're the ones who own the castle. This is Dante, signing off. Be kind to the quiet ones. Because one day, they might just own the building you're standing in.